Welcome, and thank you everybody for attending the Trail Talks tonight. I'm Ahmad Mirza, I'm a librarian here with the Santa Barbara Public Library. Here, just have the pleasure tonight to introduce James Wapotich. James is our library partner for the Trail Talks. We appreciate this partnership with you, James, quite a bit. We love working with you. James is an experienced backpacker, trail guide, and author of the Santa Barbara News Press hiking column Trail Quest. Again, just a big thank you to James for helping us every month, every week. We're always in contact, finding new exciting speakers, published speakers, experts in the field, expert in our local backcountry. And that's a lot of that's attributed to your hard work, James, and we really do appreciate that. If anyone here is interested in following James's adventures, you can check out his blog. It's www.songsofthewilderness.com. And I'll say that again because I'm always going to hype you up here. That's www.songsofthewilderness.com. And I will put it in chat so that people can see it all spelled out as well. And with that, tonight's talk will highlight close to 24 different waterfalls and cascades in the mountains behind Santa Barbara and Ojai, and will feature a mix of relatively easy to reach places as well as more remote locations in the San Rafael and Dick Smith wilderness areas. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, James. I'm gonna pass the floor to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ahmad. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, it's great partnering with the library. I know that it's, I think it's a real community service to have these talks available. I know that the local trails and hiker community really appreciate them. And they really appreciate the fact that the library hosts them. And we were talking about it earlier, looking forward to at some point on down the road, getting back to in-person talks, because I think people enjoy just shaking hands and seeing, other hiker folk out there. So yeah, my name's James Wapotich. I used to write the hiking column for the Santa Barbara News Press called Trail Quest, and still teaching backpacking classes and doing hikes. My introduction to the backcountry was through the Boy Scouts. I was in Troop 15, and my first backpacking trip was when I was 12. And we were one of the few troops that did backpacking on a regular basis. Every spring we would do a 5, a 10, a 20, and a 50-miler backpacking trip. And so yeah, I did my first 50-miler when I was 12, and it was a rough hike, and but I came back for more. And then after scouting, I just continued hiking on my own in the backcountry, car camping, day hiking, and backpacking. And then eventually that interest, that hobby, that passion landed me an opportunity at the News Press as a freelance writer to do the column. So yeah, want to announce a couple upcoming things. So next month we have Helen Tarbett. She's the lady who works at the Forest Service, who every year does the update of the wildflowers at Figueroa Mountain. So if you see those notices or the updates on the Forest Service website, she's the lady who goes out there and kind of surveys what the wildflowers are like this year and gives us updates. This chart that you see on the left is something that she helped make for the Forest Service, and it lists some of the common wildflowers on Figueroa Mountain. And so she'll put that together. And if you know your wildflowers and you look at this chart, you're going to be like, wow, I see a lot of these, not just on Figueroa Mountain, but on a lot of trails in the backcountry. And that's what's kind of cool about the topic, is that it's going to cover a lot of wildflowers that you may have seen and didn't know the name of, or didn't know, what their range was. And so she's going to cover that. And I also put in the little Humboldt Lily down here in the lower right-hand corner. I haven't seen that on the top of Figueroa Mountain, but I have seen it down in Fur Canyon. So I'm going to call that Figueroa Mountain. I also have a class coming up starting at the end of April called Wilderness Hiking and Plants. And it's 3 Saturdays, 9 to 11. And it'll be at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. And it's very similar to a class I offered, really the first class I offered, which was called How Not to Get Lost in the Woods. And that class really was me reverse engineering what are the trail skills that I use and how do I find my way out on these trails so that I'm not a statistic of someone who gets lost out there. And then I've kind of adapted it over the years based on what people's interests are. And the 3 classes really together, the more I kind of reflect on it, really help. If you think about like, hey, there's somebody who knows the backcountry like the back of their hand. Like if you wanted to have that ability, these 3 classes would lay the foundation for that. The first class is reading the landscape, really work with how to read the topography, how to orient yourself to the landscape without a GPS or a compass, and really have just sort of an innate understanding of, how the mountains are put together. And we do work with some maps as a way of kind of building your own mental map. The second class is focused on nature connection, but really that's understanding like how habitats are organized on the landscape, learning some of the key plants in each of those habitats so that you can use that. It's weird to say as a way of orienting yourself to the landscape, but really noticing the transitions as you move across the landscape. And then the third class is listening to nature, and that's really about tuning into your senses. And in a way, it might be like, well, what does that have to do with finding your way out in nature on the trails? But you'd just be surprised how much of route finding is really an intuitive art. And the more you can kind of tune into nature and listen to the subtle cues that it's giving you, the easier it is to somehow magically find the trail, right? It does seem like magic at that level. And so those three different components together really do lay the foundation for being able to know the backcountry like the back of your hand. It's not on the Botanic Gardens website yet. It should be up in the next week or two, but if you're interested, just email me. I put that in there. That information is also going to be on my blog. So as Ahmad said, that's just songsofthewilderness.com. And there is a way to just put your email address in there, and then you just automatically get a notice anytime something's posted. So let's jump into the talk. I'm going to cover, as Ahmad said, about 24 different waterfalls and cascades that are in the mountains behind Santa Barbara and Ojai, kind of basically Santa Barbara, Ventura County, which, is what I consider our local area in terms of the backcountry. And I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here and say that the formula for a waterfall is mountains plus water, or in our case, mountains plus rain, because we don't live somewhere with a lot of year-round water, so we really do need rain. So that's like the magic ingredient to make waterfalls. So mountains, why do we have mountains? I'm going to do a little of geology here. So if you're, geology adverse, just hang on, it won't be that long. So in our local area, we have the Pacific plate, that's sliding past the North American plate. And this is called a transform fault. It's what the plate connection is called. And as the Pacific plate moves north, it sometimes snags up and builds up some tension. And when that releases, that's how we get earthquakes. So that's how those two plates are interacting. And I'm going to get to what that has to do with mountains. Another thing you may have learned about tectonic plates, back in school, is that the Pacific plate, as it was sliding, or as it is sliding across the North American plate, has picked up pieces of the North American plate and dragged it along with it. And a lot of those pieces are Southern California, or parts of Southern California. If you kind of look at this one slide, there's a block here with a T for the transverse range. While that was being dragged north, it was also rotated. This little animation kind of illustrates that when it says SB. So as the stuff was dragged north, it actually rotated 90 degrees. And that's a transverse range. Those are the mountains that we have right behind Santa Barbara and Ojai. And here's just another shot showing that T is the transverse range. So this mountain block got rotated 90 degrees and then kind of slammed into where it is. And then that was all underwater when that happened. That land was there underwater. But how did it become mountains, right? So if you look at, I wish I had my little pointer here, but if you kind of look at the little inset image in the upper right, if you see that curve in the San Andreas Fault, kind of right above where it says Los Angeles, and then also kind of highlighted here with this red dot in a bigger picture, that's referred to as the Big Bend. And so what's happening is, even though the Pacific plate is sliding against North America, it's kind of getting hung up on that bend a little bit, and it's actually creating some compression. And local geologist Tanya Atwater, coined a really nice term. She calls it transpression, because it's a transformed fault, but there's compression, and that compression is pushing up the mountains. And so that plate kind of running into this big bend is what lifted up the Transverse Mountains about 5 million years ago. And the Transverse Mountains are actually some of the fastest growing mountains in the world. They're going, doesn't sound like a lot, but 2 millimeters every year. But they're still rising. They're still getting taller. They're, of course, being eroded down at the same time. But they are some of the fastest growing mountains. And that's what created the mountains that we have here, is all that geologic activity. So the other component I'm saying is rain. If you've lived in Santa Barbara for even, I'm going to say like 5 years, you know that it's feast or famine, right? We either get like a lot of great rain and it's really cool and we think like, wow, it's always like this, or we have basically drought conditions. This little chart from Santa Barbara County Water District, or just Santa Barbara County Water Resources, shows you the fluctuation. There's not even like a real specific pattern. It's just we have times where we get a lot of rain and times that we don't. I like this little chart just because the stuff in red is El Nino and the stuff in blue is La Nina. And you can see there's been some good La Nina years and some bad El Nino years. And I kind of put that in there because it's easy to think like, oh, it's El Nino, we're going to get a lot of rain. And it's like, yes and no, there's still other factors. This chart is for Ventura County, basically the same thing. I was looking at my photos, like 2017 was a pretty good year for rain. Yeah, 2011 was a good year for rain. And 2 years ago was actually a pretty good year for rain. This chart, I wish I could find one of these for Ventura County, but this shows the density of rain. It's a 100-year average. So it kind of evens out all the different fluctuations. But if you see where it's the darkest blue, that's where Broadcast Peak is at San Ynez Peak, behind or above the Dekepis Trail. And that's the rainiest spot in Santa Barbara County. The other thing a little to the east of that is La Cumbre Peak area. And then this little blob, if you will, north of that is Big Pine Mountain. So those are some of the rainiest areas in Santa Barbara County. And it's interesting that when I was thinking about it, a lot of the waterfalls that I'm going to highlight are mostly in either the San Ynez Mountains or the Nordhoff Ridge Topa Topa area, which are all sort of the same string, in the same line of mountains. So it's interesting that that's also the area that gets the most rain. So I'm going to start off by covering the waterfalls on the backside of the San Ynez Mountains. So that's in the lower part of the slide, and then switch it to the front side of San Ynez Mountains, and then hop over to stuff that you could reach in Ventura County. A lot of it's off of Highway 33, and then finish with one that's in the backcountry over by Big Pine Mountain. Okay, so the first waterfall that I'm going to talk about is Nahoe. And this is, you go down 101, wrap around past Gaviota, and go over, forget the name of that pass now, and hop over here to Nahoe Falls County Park. I put on here the Chumash name for that area. I'm probably not going to be successful in pronouncing it, but Noxui. And so the Spanish turned that into Nahoe. Noxui translates as meadow. So the village of Noxui was probably out in the meadow, not up by the waterfall. This is actually one of the shortest hikes out of this whole series. The other short hike would be Rose Valley Falls. So that one's in here too. But this one's, it's basically a little more than a half-mile round trip. There's a great trail. It's pretty well used. It follows the creek. Lots of gray squirrels out there. This is the falls in a good year with a decent flow of water on it. And Nahoe is kind of an interesting waterfall in that, a lot of waterfalls are being eroded up the canyon, because the water is wearing down the material underneath it. But Nahoe is actually growing forward because of the deposits of travertine. And here's like a better picture of that. And so what travertine is mineral deposits. So as the water is flowing through the creek above the falls, it's dissolving minerals in the rocks and the soil and the sediment. And some of those minerals are calcium and magnesium carbonate. And then when the water goes over the waterfall, that mist and spray turns it into like an aerosol, if you will, that then dries and lands and deposits those chemicals and builds up this travertine. And so you can see this really comes out a long ways. It's more dramatic. It's this dramatic on some other falls not as much. So it kind of depends, I think, on how much of that minerals, how many of those minerals are available in the water, upstream. This is a shot of the full falls. This is in a really good year. Like, it's rare to see all three of those little rivulets. The secret to really, if you're going to be a waterfall hunter is you got to track the weather. And the best time to go out is like right after the rain, because that's when these are most active. And it seems kind of obvious, but if it's been a good year for rain, you're still not guaranteed that you're going to have like a great show. So sometimes you want to time it to like, hey, just rained yesterday. If I can get out there, I'm going to try to get out there for my photos. The next one I'm going to show you is Dekepis. This is across from Lake Cachuma. So you go over San Marcos Pass to 154 and turn for the turnoff for Camp Whittier and Circle V. And then the trail just goes up the canyon. Dekepis is named after another Chumash village, the Chumash village of Dekepis. And that village is located near the confluence of the creek and the Santa Ynez River. So it's now, underwater. Dekepis, that word means seed beater. And that's a tool that the Shumash made, like a woven basket. And they would use it to thrash flower heads, like the sages, to knock the seeds into a basket they were gathering. Because we do have a lot of useful seed plants here in our backcountry. And so harvesting those seeds was a resource that they could work with. So the trail follows a creek upstream. Most of these hikes do that. This is a great trail for wildflowers. If you go out right now, I know there's water in the creek, so you'll see something in the waterfall. I can't guarantee how spectacular it'll be, but there'll be water in it. And you will definitely see fiesta flower, miner's lettuce. The milkmaids have played out, and the shooting stars are starting to fade. If you'd gone a month ago, those would have also been, but these are a lot of the early starters. So I threw them in here just because there's some basic wildflowers that you'd likely see on a trail. Lupin's another one you probably see a lot of on this trail up to the falls. It's about a mile from the trailhead up to this sign. And then there's a little side trail that looks like it just goes off into the bushes. But that trail actually drops down back to the creek and takes you up to Dekepis Falls. So there's really no trail down in the creek. It's just rock scrambling, but it's not too bad. That whole hike is maybe 2.5 miles. This is from like a pretty good year with the flow, but you'd see something comparable this year. And this is one of the trails that I'm usually guaranteed to see some banana slugs. I think banana slugs are cool. So I do have like a little list in my head of like, where am I probably likely going to see that? Another one is Fir Canyon. It's not in the slideshow because there's no specifically epic waterfall in there, but that's another one that you're guaranteed to find them. So past that sign, if you're staying on the trail, one of the novel things about this trail, and you have to hike, about 3.5 miles into your hike to get up to here. But these are what's referred to as relic plants. And so what we have here is madrone and tan bark oak. And you can't really see it in the slide, but back in here, there's also some sword fern. And 40,000 years ago to 20,000 years ago, Santa Barbara County was much wetter and much rainier and much cooler. And so these plants were much more common. Redwoods grew all the way down to the La Brea tar pits. And so there were redwoods along the coast. And then as the ice age played out and it got warmer and drier, these plants were treated further north. And so something about the backside of the San Ynez Mountains in this area is still wet enough and cool enough that this pocket of relic plants, this little community can exist. It was damaged in the Sherpa fire, but the madrone is coming back. That's madrone in bloom. The tan bark oak is coming back. That's tan bark in bloom. And into this is sword fern. And so it's cool to see this little community all growing here. And then past that, the trail crests out. If you want to get all the way to the top and back, that's an 8-mile round trip hike, epic views of Lake Kachuma, and then of course, great views of the coast. Definitely a great hike. You're going to see a lot of different plants, and yeah, you can add on the waterfall, and I don't know, it's a great outing for people who like to hike a long ways. The next one I'm going to show you is Wellhouse Falls, and probably a lot of people haven't heard of this. This is like a really tough one to get. There's 2 in here that are hard to get in terms of like getting down to the waterfall. It's tough. There's other ones that are hard to get to because you got to backpack in, but that's just backpacking. You know what I mean? Like the actual accessing the waterfall once you're there isn't that bad. So this one starts near Knapp's Castle. If you've been to Knapp's Castle, this is a photo of what it looked like when it was built before the fire. So George Owen Knapp, he purchased this property from Thomas Lewis. The waterfall is actually down in Lewis Canyon, so it's named after Lewis. And then in the 1940s or 1940, Knapp sold this to Francis Holden, and 5 weeks later, the whole thing was burned. Not the whole thing, sorry. The majority of it was burned in the Paradise Fire. And then in 1950, the observatory, which is sort of this building off to the right, the little tower thing, that got burned in a Refugio fire. And most people are more familiar with seeing Knapp's Castle like this, so that's one of the 2 fireplaces that are kind of the remnants that you can see. This is like, I think, where the living room was, and you can see why Knapp built his castle here. His mountain lodge is just this epic view out towards, the San Ynez Valley and what is now Lake Kachuma. Knapp also helped build East Camino Cielo because, of course, he needed like some decent access to his property, but he was instrumental in getting East Camino Cielo constructed and later paved. Currently, there's now a structure there. This was sort of a surprise to me. This is from 3 days ago, and It's the property is an in-holding, so the people who own that property have built a house there. It's currently closed to the public. I read something that said that they might be open to visitors at some point. I don't know. They might do it as an Airbnb. I don't know. I don't have all the details, so like don't quote me on any of that. But right now, it's kind of access is closed to the public, so it's a change in the history. I'm also remembering that when I give these talks in public, I always like let people interrupt me with questions if they want, just because I know it's hard to like hold on a question all the way till the end. That's not as feasible in a Zoom talk, but a little mindfulness exercise that I like to do is if you have a really burning question, obviously put it into the chat and we'll try to get the end. But if you really focus on your question, it might percolate into my awareness and I might just end up answering it just by steering over into that area, thinking like, oh, people might want to know about that. So give it a shot. If you have a really burning question, I might actually like answer it magically. So when Knapp had his mountain lodge there, he actually built a road down to Wellhouse Falls. And when I was in the Boy Scouts, we used to go to Knapp's Castle and we'd actually do our orienteering there. We would stand in the ruins and whip out the topo maps because you really have a great view down towards the San Ynez Valley and Oso Canyon and up towards Little Pine and the San Rafael Mountain. So it's a great place to do some orienteering. And then we would continue the hike down what's now the Snyder Trail and then peel off of that to go to the falls. And in the late 70s, early 80s, that old remnant trail got washed out and we stopped going. And I tried to visit the falls a couple times, but got turned back by the brush. You can see the old road cut here, and then it kind of just disappears into brush. And it always got to turn back because it was a little too overgrown. But one day I had this inspiration to like give up on trying to find the old trail. And instead, just like, if I could just get down to the creek, that could be an alternative way to reach the falls. And so I eventually figured out a way to do that. And this is why it's not easy. It was tough, kind of going down a little gully, crawling under brush, climbing down the face of a dry waterfall and hitting the creek. But I was able to get to the creek. And this is not Wellhouse Falls. I'd forgotten about this. There's like another waterfall that's not that big, and you have to get around that one. This is something that was washed downstream, and I don't know the purpose of this piece of equipment, but it said that Knapp like had a viewing platform that he built at the falls, and I did see that when I was in the Boy Scouts, and it said that he actually had like electricity down there. I'm not sure how that happened. Some of these things are hard to tell if they're just embellishments to the story over the year, that he would like project light onto the falls, and that he also had like a way to dam the creek up above the falls and could release water so that when he invited his guests, they could see this. And that he supposedly also pumped down, organ music from the house so that people could have, like a soundtrack for viewing the waterfall. And again, it's hard to know which of those elements are embellishments, but there was a viewing platform when I was in the Scouts, and that got washed away. And this could easily be some kind of pump device or a generator. This is a second waterfall that you have to get around. And then you arrive at the base of Wellhouse Falls. And this is just a shot through the trees. And this is a shot a little bit closer. Again, I don't recommend going to this one. It's a lot of work, but I wanted to include it just to kind of be thorough. When I was out there, this was a couple of years ago when I visited, I actually did get to see a bobcat on the trail. So that was kind of cool, like a little pleasant bonus on my hike. So the next one I'm going to show you, I just went to in January because we had some decent rain in the spring. And so I went out and checked it out. This is also going to lead into a backpacking trip. In this talk, there's 3 backpacking trips that I put in here that you could do. So this is the one to Indian Canyon, because you would come down to Cold Spring Trail and then continue over to Indian Canyon. But I'm going to talk about just the first waterfall. This is a shot looking north along the trail. So this is, I'm going to call this Guinea Falls, because this is Guinea Creek. And I took this photo way back in 2011. And this is like less than a half mile down the trail, looking back up the canyon. And you can see this very ephemeral waterfall. Like you only see this when there's like, it's rained recently. And I'm just going to point this out right above the falls. If you see those plants with the reddish tinge, that's madrone. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too. But this is an ephemeral waterfall. I've always kind of been intrigued by it. I often thought of like hiking all the way from Forbush to try to get it. But the couple times I tried that, I was quickly turned back by brush and wasn't particularly inspired to fight it. But I read this guy, George Williams, he's a trail runner. He made a blog post, talked about how he like came down from the trail and just cut down into the creek. And I don't know if this is a spot he took, but I found this spot that kind of like took me right down to the creek. And this is another tough hike. This is not easy. Like the first few minutes here are pretty easy, not even minutes. The first like 90 seconds is like, wow, this is great. And then it immediately turns into brush and you have to like get down on your hands and knees and get under it and follow a little ravine and kind of slide down. And it feels kind of sketchy and it's even harder to get back up. But I still think it was easier than coming up all the way from the creek. And I was able to get to the base of Guinea Falls, and it's a really sweet little waterfall. And in fact, I didn't have that too hard of a time getting down there. I wasn't even sure if I was at the right spot. I'm like, that didn't seem hard enough. So I went downstream and there was another waterfall. And then below that, another little cascade. But that first one was definitely Guinea Falls. And one of the really the bonus or the highlights for me is that there was, in addition to madrone, there was actually tanbark oak and sword fern. There's very few places where I see all three of those plants growing together. You know, the Dekepis Trail is one place. It's interesting. I did some hikes up in Lopez Canyon in San Luis Obispo County in the Santa Lucia Wilderness. And when you hike up that one, there's like madrone everywhere. And then you further get up the canyon, there's also tanbark oak. And then further, there's even sword fern. And then I recently did a hike in the Silver Peak Wilderness, and up to the canyons that I was in, there's like almost nothing but madrone, tanbark oak, and sword fern. And so it kind of proves that, you know, these plants just retreated further north to places that are still wetter and cooler than how it is in Santa Barbara County. So I want to give a shout out to George. So I read his blog post, The Waterfall at Guinea Creek. He talks about how I got down there. That kind of inspired me. But why I'm really giving him a shout out here, aside from he's a cool trail runner who like takes photos of flowers, is this newer website this newer blog that he made called Wildflowers in Santa Barbara. And what's great about this is it's a visual list of all the different wildflowers you would see. I mean, it's also organized by plant families, which is cool. And, you know, you can search it by, you know, the particular flowers. But to me, any guide that's visual, I really like, because I sort of like learn the backcountry visually. So when I see a plant, I'm flipping through my flower guides or looking online for something that visually looks like it. I'm not really like breaking out the Jepson manual and keying it, like how many leaves does it have and how many sepals does it has, because I find for me personally, it's quicker to just do a visual match. And so his website just has a great listing of the different flowers that he's seen out there. And it's pretty comprehensive. And then he also has it organized by trail. So that's kind of handy. So definitely thanks, George, for all the great work you're doing out there on that. So that waterfall, the first one is before you even get to Forbush. When you continue past Forbush, the trail goes over a little ridge and then drops down, eventually joins a little unnamed canyon, which does have year-round water. People call this the Emerald Pools. This is during a good year when there's a lot of water flowing over it. And this is from this January when I went, you know, down into the creek and took a shot of it. And this is what it more typically looks like, you know, in like January, February, when we've had some rain. But it's definitely worth seeing. And if you're hiking down Cold Spring Trail, you're going to pass this. This is a shot right from the trail. And you can see here, this is like a massive buildup of travertine, another example of that. And the trail comes down and crosses the San Ynez River. This is also from January this year. It was about knee deep, so certainly crossable. And when you get into the side, it takes you, there's actually now a reroute. Back in the day, you'd have to follow the old North Cold Spring Trail through what's called the Mono Jungle. And that's been, you know, because of the water in Gibraltar Reservoir backing up the water table, there's like a ton of cottonwoods and that area gets flooded every year. Not every year, but it gets flooded frequently enough that the trail is just sort of like really challenging to follow. And so the Los Padres Forest Association, working with the Forest Service, actually built a reroute that's much easier. It's got a lot of up and down, but it's still just easier because there's no route finding, there's no losing your shoes, there's no getting lost, there's no having to just like, you know, hike up the creek and hoping that you're going to figure it out. So it does make it much easier to get to Little Caliente and Mono Campground. This is a shot of Mono Campground from several years ago. After the Ray fire, a lot of debris was flooded into the camp. This is from last year. I went there Valentine's Day with my girlfriend last year, and that's where we camped. That other campsite that you saw in the previous photo is the table like back behind that. That's still kind of like half buried, although some friends of mine went out there and they actually dug it out. So I think that's actually good now too. There's 3 sites there. This is a nice place to camp. It's about maybe a half mile at most from Little Caliente, which of course, Hot Springs, who can beat that? Valentine's Day, hot springs with your girlfriend, right? That's you can just write that down and thank me later, Valentine's Day with your girlfriend at the hot springs. So from Cold Spring Saddle, where you'd start this hike off of East Camino Cielo, it's about 6 miles to Mono Campground, spend a night there, hike over to the hot springs. If you're going to Indian Canyon for the waterfalls that I'm going to show you next, you would continue past Mono. So I've kind of put the map back up in here. So Cold Spring Trail goes down to Mono Campground. And then from Mono, it's less than a mile to where the road ends. And then you'd follow the Indian Trail. But you'd follow the road for a little bit, and then you catch the Indian Trail and continue up to Meadow. So this is Indian Creek. This is from like December or January. It's not a year-round creek, but in this winter and spring, you're going to see water in there. And the trail is in good shape all the way up to Meadow Camp. It's been worked. The LPFA has done work on it, and it's just in decent shape all the way up to Meadow Camp. This is a picture of the camp prior to the Ray fire. And then this is what it looked like just last Memorial Day. I'm going to do a little plug here for the Los Padres Forest Association. They're going to do what's called a working vacation, March 26th to April 3rd. A working vacation is usually like a 7 to 10 day trail project. But the good news is that you and we can join that project for just like 3 of those days or more. Like you just pick like 3 days that you would come out there. So it does overlap with 2 weekends. So you could go out for a weekend and just get out there for like 3 or 4 days and help with the trail project. And what they're going to do is they're going to work the trail from Meadow up to Indian Canyon Campground. And that place is like badly overgrown. I mean, that trail is badly overgrown through that section. Okay, this next slide. So the Ray fire burned the lower part of Indian Canyon, and from Meadow Camp for about a mile, it's in really bad shape because not only was it overgrown before the fire has sort of like brought in a lot of debris and flood damage that has really just obliterated the trails in some places or made it very difficult to follow. In fact, for me personally, once I get out of the burn area, the trail, even though it's overgrown, is easier to follow because I've learned how to find that trail. But the fire really changed the character of the growth patterns. So it's great that they're going to go out there and clean that up. And then, of course, while you're out, so that's looking up from Meadow Camp, looking up the canyon. They're going to camp at Meadow, but I'm sure there'll be some time to go up to Indian Canyon Camp. And from there, start your way up the creek to go visit Maiden Pools and the waterfalls up there. I was out there with my buddy last Memorial Day. Tons of turtles out there. This little baby turtle was kind of cool. I must have seen like a half a dozen turtles in this creek, which is always kind of fun. I put this one in here because when I saw this guy, I thought this was a dead lizard on a rock that was sort of like tragically died here or something. And while I was taking my picture, I saw its tongue move. And then this lizard, I swear to God, gave me stink eye. Like, dude, why are you watching me get a drink? So I kind of backed off and like, all right, well, whatever. And so it wasn't a dead lizard. It's actually just getting a drink. So anyway, so these are the waterfalls that you would see. This is about a mile and a half up from Indian Canyon Camp. There's an old remnant trail that's mostly like poison oak now. So your best route is just to go up the creek. This is during a good year. You can see in the right here a little bit, if you look closely, there's like 2 guys trying to get over the falls because there are some cool things to see further up the canyon. There's another great pool, and you could hike all the way to the Narrows and tie into the Upper Indian Trail. There's no trail between those 2 sections, but that is a backpacking trip you can do, is to hike through the Narrows. But the easier way to get this fall is to actually climb up the face. It's kind of counterintuitive, but you can actually just take steps up that like sort of pyramid looking face and then lift packs that way. And it's much easier on a day hike, just kind of scramble over it. And here you can see the upper pool. That's a great swim hole. And then, if you continue up the creek, and there is no trail, you're just rock hopping the whole way. This is what Brian on his map calls perfect 10. You need really a good year of rain for it to look like this. Any other year, it's going to be a little bit of a mud hole. And that's fine for the turtles, but it's going to be disappointing to see. It's not an easy hike. Like, you got to backpack in all the way from Cold Spring Saddle all the way to Meadow Camp is 12 miles. And then from Meadow, it's another 2.5 to Indian Creek Camp and another 1.5 miles to the falls. And then I don't know how far it is up to perfect 10, but it's from Indian Creek Camp. It's like a full day to go up to these pools and back. you know. Oh, so here's another trip that I did with my girlfriend. This was kind of cool. This is to visit Alder Creek Falls. A lot of people haven't heard of this, but we came up with a fun route. We came down through Blue Canyon and then cut over to the Franklin Trail to visit Alder Creek. And you could do this as an overnighter. You know, if you see the total miles here is about 18 miles, so you could do this as an overnighter. But we actually did it as a 3-day. And what was cool about it is we hiked to Upper Blue Canyon from Romero Saddle. So I put this blue dot for Romero Saddle, and we, took a half day off from work on Friday and came in on the first day 4 miles. And it was a little bit like sleeping at the trailhead. Like we woke up the next morning and got on the trail at 9. And it's like, if I was leaving from my house, it'd be challenging to get on trail by 9. And so it was like, wow, we got like a full day to hike here. That's really cool. And then, we spent the next night at Alder Camp and then hiked out on the Franklin Trail. So this is just a shot of Blue Canyon. Takes its name from the serpentine that's growing in the canyon. But there's also a lot of blue schist growing in there. So I kind of like to give a shout out to blue schist because it's actually one of my favorite rocks. This is a huge outcrop that's really cool to see along the trail. And there's both of these rocks found in that canyon. This was 2 years ago. There's a lot of great water in Blue Canyon. And so that really set us up for a great waterfall experience on Alder Creek. Just put in this map. So you pop out of Blue Canyon, you get on the Romero Conhuesa Road, and then you hit the Juncal Murrieta Road and hike towards Jameson, past Jameson a little bit to the beginning of the Franklin Trail, or the end, depending how you want to look at it. You do cross the San Ynez River. We were a little concerned that it might be like flowing a little too vigorously, but at this crossing, it's really wide and spreads out. So it's not that big of a deal. We also get to see Jameson kind of flowing over. So you turn up the Franklin Trail. It follows Alder Creek up the canyon. This thing in the middle of the image here, this is the flume that redirects water from Alder Creek to Jameson. But during the Thomas Fire, it got knocked out. So they are rebuilding it. So this is a remnants of it. The trail kind of climbs out of the canyon as it goes up to Alder Camp. We got kind of a late start, and so we weren't able to go to the falls in the afternoon because the light had already kind of faded on us. So I was a little frustrated, oh shoot, we're not going to get to see the falls today. And then I remembered they're basically a half mile downstream from Alder Camp. So I'm like, oh, I'll just go in the morning. And it was cool because the light. So these are some baby blue eyes, larkspur, and a personal favorite, Ojai fritillary. So I got to see some cool wildflowers when I went down there. And then hike back down to the waterfall. And how you get them on the waterfall is if you're hiking up from Jameson, if you will, from the road, you're hiking up the trail up Alder Canyon. And just at the point where the trail wants to leave the creek and start some switchbacks, which is basically so it can bypass the falls, you just continue up the creek. It's not that far. And this is a little video showing first a side creek. Oops. First a side creek. And then it's going to swing over to Alder Creek Falls. So that one's just you got to work to get that one, but it's kind of a nice waterfall. A lot of people don't know about it, so I'm kind of putting that out there for people who want to check it out. Someone reminded me that if you are out visiting these waterfalls, don't be posting it on social media all over the place, where it can go viral. And, here I'm saying that giving a talk, but, you can be aware of these places and visit them, but, social media can really destroy some places. I think that's even more of a concern with places that are like swim holes or hot springs, right? Because those are year-round destinations. Waterfalls sometimes aren't as interesting in the summer or the fall because there's no water in them. So then they're just like a hike to somewhere. So now I'm going to switch to stuff on the front side. So this is Seven Falls. I'm sure a lot of people have been here. This is you start at the end of Tunnel Road and go up that access road to Hesacita Trail. And then just where it crosses a creek, you turn up the creek. This is, of course, from a good year when you really get some nice water in the pools. There are actually 7 of these little cascades, depending how you count them. When you first hit the creek going up to Seven Falls, there's a little side trail on your left. And that trail kind of makes its way up on the ridge that overlooks the canyon. So that's where this view is from. And that sort of off-trail route is the route that people take to do Cathedral Peak, I mean, Arlington Peak and Cathedral Peak, but as it kind of continues along the ridge, it does split before it gets to those peaks. And one of those trails, the one on the left, kind of contours the canyon and bypasses Seven Falls and then drops you back down into the creek so that you can visit what's called the three pools above Seven Falls. And so this is the first two pools. There's a pool here in the foreground, and then there's another pool above that. There's really no trail. You're just kind of like scrambling up the creek and trying to figure out your way. I would say this is medium challenging because there are some places where you have to do a kind of a rock climbing to get up there, but it's definitely fun. And then this is the uppermost pool, and this little basin thing that's carved out of here usually has water in it year round. And then you can sort of see that waterfall. You can actually slide down that. It's a little intimidating at first, but it's kind of fun. You do want to make sure that there's actually a deep pool before you do that, because I've seen sometimes it's really silted up and there's only like 2 feet of water in it. Other times it's more like 4 or 5, and that works pretty well. Canyon wren, I did see some canyon wrens out there. Just a cute bird, so I put him in here. Or her, could be her. Another waterfall in Mission Canyon is Mission Falls. The easiest way to reach this one is to go to the top of Tunnel Trail off of East Camino Cielo Road and come down the trail, because it's about a mile to Mission Falls, where coming up from the bottom, it's probably like 3 miles. This is a year with good rain, so this little creek the trail crosses actually has water in it, and there's another ephemeral waterfall that you would see. Mission Falls is, I would say, a very ephemeral waterfall. It only lasts a couple days. You can sort of see it from town. So this is one of those ones, like if it's raining, you want to go out the next day. If you wait a week, it's just, there's not going to be anything there. So this is a shot of Mission Falls. I've hiked past the falls now, and I'm looking back up the canyon to get this shot. That's a pretty cool one. So the Thomas Fire, everyone's have heard about the Thomas Fire. That's, started in December of 2017, and at the time was the largest wildfire in our area. It's now like the 3rd or 4th wildfire in California. So that's kind of sad that there are now even bigger fires. This fire was unusual in that it burned in December. Most of the big wildfires we've had have been, in the fall, September, October, that kind of time. If the devastation of that wildfire wasn't enough, because it burned all this stuff in the backcountry and the front country behind Ojai and Santa Barbara, is that on January 9th, there was like an unusual 200-year rain event. And normally what happens is we have wildfires, and then we get some gentle rains that come in that kind of help break up the stuff on the soil. Because like when chaparral, so how chaparral plants, one of its strategies for protecting itself from the heat is it has like a waxy substance in its leaves that kind of helps reduce heat loss, right? I mean, moisture loss. But when those plants get burned, that chemical is released, including the dry leaves on the ground, and that chemical forms like a waxy coating on the soil. And so like gentle rains can kind of help break that up over time. But we didn't have that. So that heavy rain just hit that water repellent coating and just rushed off of it. And after fire, since there's not that many plants, there's nothing really holding stuff in place. So all those loose hillsides were just gathered up and flushed down the canyons in a debris flow. And 23 people lost their lives, and more than 500 structures were either damaged or destroyed. And it's taken a while for the community to recover from it. And incidentally, there was also a significant amount of damage to the trails. Well, I'll show you some pictures where the creeks have been carved out. So big shout out to like the Montecito Trails Foundation, the Bucket Brigade, Los Padres Forest Association, the National Forest, Santa Barbara County and City Parks, who all kind of helped rehabilitate these trails. So the first place I want to show you is Tangerine Falls. And I'm not going to spend much time on it because the Thomas Fire really changed the character of this hike. It used to be kind of like a somewhat challenging hike to begin with, but now it's really like it should be avoided, I guess. There's been search and rescue's gone out there and rescued people who've gotten stuck because it's a much more difficult hike now. So this is prior to the Thomas Fire. If you know that trail, this is like one of the first crossings you come to. It's a cute little cascade, and you can see the trail up here on the upper right. And then this is what it looked like after the Thomas Fire. It's much lower. That trail that was on the upper right is just gone. And so the only way through is you have to like clamber over this rock. And this is like the first barrier you're going to get to. and you can probably get through this, but it's like pretty challenging. And then you can get up in towards Tangerine Falls. When the water is low and there's no water, you can actually make your way up the creek pretty well. But of course, you don't want to see the waterfall when there's no water, right? But when there is water, you can't really make it up the creek. And so people have been taking this really sketchy route on the left. And I've been up there just twice, sort of like, had to go check it out. But it's not on my list of places I go anymore because I don't like that route and it's not really worth the risk to me. And maybe that's because I'm getting older, I don't know. And the fact that search and rescue's gone out there, I'm kind of like bypassing that one and not really recommending it to people. There is a trail that goes around the waterfall. You can't use it to access it, but you can get like way better views with less risk. So this old trail starts pretty much like at the same point where you peel off the main trail, you cross the West Fork Cold Spring, and it's just as you're about to get to the main fork, you just go up this side trail. I think there's a map here. Yeah. So maybe not the best photo of a map, but like you can see the off trail route to Tangerine Falls. This is prior to the Thomas Fire, so that route doesn't really exist anymore. The little trail to the left still does, and it gets you above the falls. And again, there's no way to reach the falls from this trail, but you can go up above the falls, and it's a cool little hidden world up there. And this trail used to go all the way to the top of the mountains. Now it's kind of overgrown. So this trail that I'm showing you is the original Cold Spring Trail. It was built way back in the 1870s so people could access the quicksilver mines down by what is now Gibraltar Reservoir. And then in 1902, the Forest Service built the East Fork Trail. And then they decided they didn't want to maintain two trails, so the original Cold Spring got abandoned. And it pretty much became forgotten until the 1964 Coyote Fire, which cleared all the brush out. And then people rediscovered the trail and did a little bit of work on it. But now it's pretty much, it's overgrown again because of the Thomas Fire. This is a hike I did last summer up above it. So there is some water above Tangerine Falls during the summer. It's not a big pool, but you're going to see something cool in this pool. So I figured I'd share this video. So this is a Pacific Newt, and they actually enjoy these pools that we have in a lot of our front country canyons. And it's always fun to see them. Newts have like a toxin in their skin, so they're not really on anyone's menu. And when you see newts, they're kind of chill because they're not really worried about anyone trying to catch them. In fact, the only predation that they really suffer from is critters eating their eggs. But they're just a fun animal to find out there. It is horsey grabbing some air. So one of the things you can visit up above Tangerine Falls is the old root cellar. This is from, I don't remember when this is from, but this is what it often looked like. And then I was up here just a year or so ago, and it was totally overgrown. And then people have rehabilitated it, so now you can still see the root cellar. And that's a remnant from an old homestead that was up there in that area. San Ysidro Falls, this is from before the Thomas Fire. I don't really have any pictures because I haven't been out there when there was any good water since the Thomas Fire. This is what it looked like after the Thomas Fire. Again, it's much deeper now. This is like really early after the Thomas Fire, so there's a little more plant growth back in here. This is shortly after the Thomas Fire, like 5 months after when they opened back up to the public. So you can really see how the debris flow just scoured these canyons and just cleared out a lot of the creek bed and lowered it. If there was a silver lining to the fires, it was that once a lot of the plants have been burned away, it opens up a lot of sunlight. That ash creates a lot of nutrients. And so there's a lot of wildflowers that really like jumped back up. And this is a Humboldt Lily. And to me, this is a record carrier, like 27 blooms on a single plant. The one next to it has like 22. I'm big on Humboldt lilies. If you followed my stuff, I get excited about Humboldt lilies. And of course, swallowtails. This canyon also has a ton of frogs. Kind of one of the cool things about that canyon. So I'm going to hop over now to Nahoe Falls. This is behind, it's on the backside of St. Anne's Mountains, but it's off of 33. You go up 33 through Ojai and then follow Nahoe Canyon Road. That blue dot is where you'd park, and then you got to go on foot the rest of the way. This hike to Nahoe Falls, I put a circle around it so you can sort of see it on this map, is 9 miles round trip. So it's a long hike and you are doing some creek scrambling, but what makes it a difficult hike is mostly just the distance. Like getting to the falls isn't too bad. Nahoe comes from a Chumash word, Mat-Ilha. I'm not probably saying it right, but why I put this in here is that word means divide in Chumash. And if you know these mountains, you know that St. Anne's Mountains kind of end right by the Ventura River. And then at that same point, the Nordhoff Ridge that goes into the Topa starts. And so there really is like a divide on the landscape. And that's where the Ventura River kind of comes through. And so it's interesting to think that maybe the name of this village is a reference to the geography. This is pre-Thomas Fire, and this is what it looks like now. So you can see there was a similar, debris flow activity, or just a lot of heavy flow in the creek. You hike up the creek, you're eventually going to get to what's called West Falls, which is up a little side creek, and then you're going to get to the main fall. There's that little rope thing on the left. If you're adventuresome and try it out, you'll get a view above the falls to this area. If you didn't like that rope thing, you're not going to be interested in going down into this because it's much harder. If you do go down in it, you can go get to the base of that fall. I've done it a couple times. To me, this view is worth it in itself. Like, I don't need to go any further because it doesn't improve past that. This is one of my favorite areas. This is actually pretty easy. So Rose Valley Falls, it's like a half mile to the falls. This one, you could bring your kids on. It's a great hike. You can go out there and make it into a longer hike by going to Rose Valley Falls and then going over to Lyon Canyon and tagging the waterfalls behind East and West Fork Line. And that whole little hike is 6.5 miles. So you could do a nice day hike and check out all these different ones. So Rose Valley Falls, go up to Rose Valley Campground. That's where the trailhead is, and continue up to the falls. This is the lower Rose Valley Falls, more travertine. In the summer, I've seen tons of columbines growing on the face of the fall. That's kind of cool. There's not an easy way to get to the upper falls. People have actually died and injured and gotten injured, died or gotten injured because they've been trying to scramble up from the lower falls. If you really feel like that's something you need to do, you need to go back down the trail and try to figure out how people went up and contoured the way over to it. This is just from up on the hillside, a little bit better view. I don't really recommend it, but if you really feel called, don't try to go up the face of the falls. Go back downstream and try to figure it out. Just another shot of the map, because now I'm going to focus over on East Fork and West Fork Lyon. So that little connector trail goes over to Lyon Canyon. In a good year, this little creek in here is kind of sweet because it's flowing. Every other time it's just a dry little wash. Drops you down into Lyon Canyon. This is before the Thomas Fire. I put this in here because when I was out here after the Thomas Fire, I realized I always take a photo at this spot. So I had a before and after comparison. So I thought I'd put that in there. And then while I was out there, I saw this rattlesnake, and this rattlesnake has 11 rattles on its tail. And I used to think wrongly, that you could guess the age by its rattles. But when I researched it, a young rattlesnake might shed its skin 3 or 4 times a year and add a little button each time. And an older rattlesnake might shed its skin once or less a year, maybe even 2 years. And those buttons can break off. So all you could really say about this snake is that it's shed its skin at least 11 times, so you can't really conclude what its age is. But I thought I'd put that in there. So you continue up the trail, and these are actually not that big of cascades, but it's kind of a cool little thing, off the side of the trail. You have to kind of go hunt for it, but it's just a cool sight. This is West Fork Lyon. So you go up to West Fork Lyon Camp, and then just continue up less than a quarter mile up the off trail up the creek, and then you're going to get to see West Fork Falls. And then that little trail up to West Fork Lyon has a lot of Humboldt lilies if you're into looking for those. And then this is the waterfall past East Fork Lyon. Out of the 2 camps, East Fork Lyon is a much nicer place to camp. So you could do that as an overnighter. It's a great little short trip with a family. It's I don't know, 2.5 miles in. So it's a good starter backpacking trip. This is called Spruce Falls, and that camp used to be called Spruce Camp. And There's usually some water in this pool year round, even if it's not flowing. It's unusual to see all 4 of these cascades kind of coming, but that's what's kind of cool about this one. The next one I'm going to show you is Santa Paula Falls or Punch Bowls. Up to the popular swim holes, it's 8.5 miles round trip. I'm always surprised how many people are out there for a hike that long. The trail's in pretty good shape. This map that I found online, it kind of where it's kind of in this orangish color. There's a transition where people often miss the trail and end up going up the creek and making it a tougher hike. It's definitely worth checking out. This is pre-Thomas Fire again, looking up East Fork, Santa Paula Creek. And then here is what you might call Santa Paula Falls, or some people call it the Punch Bowls. A lot of things people call them the Punch Bowls. People argue with you about which one is which. Let's just say there's a nice swim hole and a waterfall here, and that's certainly with something we agree on. And then above the falls is another great pool, couple pools like this that are kind of fun. Take a little more work to get to, but they're just really nice. This is up past that pool I just showed you. There's a little side creek that you can go up, and there's actually a waterfall up there. You could call this Santa Paula Creek Falls if you wanted to. The last time I was there was a bunch of giant stream orchids growing, more than I've seen anywhere else. So I had to take a photo, of course. And then this is continuing up Santa Paula Creek to what a lot of people do call Punch Bowls. And it's just a series of pools. It's again, just like off-trail hiking. Some of it you just have to wade through. This is my girlfriend Sierra wading through this. And then here's the payoff, is this great little pool with like a water slide that you can go down and some ropes that you can swing out into it. And then if you want to continue up the trail, you can actually get up to Jackson Hole. I haven't been up there when it's been flowing. I've only been up there once and it wasn't really happening. But Christopher P. Lord, he's been up there, had a really great photo. His blog is Lost in the Los Padres, and he tromps all over the backcountry, and he got this really nice shot of what's called Jackson Hole. So now we're going to swing back over to Highway 33 and go to Potrero John. This is a relatively easy hike. I'm going to say moderately easy hike. So it's like 6 miles round trip. You go up the canyon from 33. It's about 1.5 miles up to Potrero John Camp. And that trail's last time I was there, was in good shape up to Potrero John Camp. And then past that, it was like maybe less used. So it's a little more overgrown, but not too bad. And then you get to the waterfall, and that's the payoff for that. You definitely want to time this one, not necessarily time it, but you want to go in a year when there's good water, because you can see that this was from a good year. It's not even, doesn't have a ton of water in it, but it's still kind of a nice site, and it's a really scenic canyon. If you haven't been there, it's a great place to check out. So the last one I'm going to show you is Rattlesnake Falls, and this is in the San Rafael Wilderness. And Brian Conant in his talk that he gave last month also referenced this as like an alternative to, hiking from Naira and going up to Manzana, because that's still closed until the end of this month. But I like this one too, because there's a cool waterfall that you can see, actually a couple waterfalls, and it's a great backpacking trip. The whole loop is 28 miles, and you could do it in 3 days. I guess if you're really tough, you could do it in 2 days. But yeah, it's a nice 3-day loop, and you would take 33 all the way over to Cuyama, and then come up towards Santa Barbara Canyon trailhead. And I put a blue dot where the trailhead is. And you would actually like to get to the quickest way to get to the waterfall is to go west on that road to that little gate and hike the Buckhorn Road up to Judael Trail, and then drop down to Heath. Maybe you camp there the first night, or maybe from Heath, if you look at this little inset map, you continue up to Cottonwood and go to the falls. From Heath to the falls is maybe 1.5 miles, maybe a little bit more. So 3-4 miles, round trip. If you just want to do as a day hike, like you maybe get to Heath the first night, and then the next day, do a day hike up to the falls and back. And then as part of that second day, continue up to Upper Bear, which is only like 5 miles, right? And camp there the second night. And then, if you want to go to Mount Duce for a third night, that's only like 5 miles, or you could just hike out, it's 12 miles. So you can kind of split it up however you want. So this is coming down Judael Canyon. This area was burned in the Zaka fire, but that was like 2007, but there are some pockets that were unburned. So this is like an unburned section of the San Rafael Wilderness. Drops you down to the Sisquack, the uppermost Sisquack. And then you continue down past Cottonwood. And there's a little turnoff with a sign for Rattlesnake Canyon and the falls. I'd say this is an average year of rain. Going on a good year is great, but just getting down this part of the backcountry is really epic. I have seen some rattlesnakes out there. In fact, I've seen a lot of rattlesnakes on this section from Heath up to Bear. For some reason, that's an area that they really seem to like. Put a picture in here. This is what's called Lower Bear Camp, or some people call this Falls Camp. And why I put this in here is if you want to see this next waterfall, you want to start from here and go up the creek, because the trail goes up around it and you can see the waterfall from the trail, but there's no easy way to get back down to the waterfall. So if this is on your list, you want to start from this camp and then go up the creek to this waterfall. I used to think this was unnamed, but I was reading something that Jim Blakely wrote way back in the day, and he called this Upper Sisquack Falls. And so that's a good name, Upper Sisquack Falls. There's a couple more little cascades further up that you can see from the trail. And then the trail starts to crest out of the Sisquack a little bit, and this great view back down the canyon. And then it arrives at Upper Bear. I mean, not Upper Bear, sorry, Bear. And that little creek in there, that's the uppermost Sisquack. And here's a little video of that basin. This was badly damaged in the Zaka fire. You see all these charred trees. They're not really coming back. I mean, some are resprouting, but this is from several years ago, but it's still, you can still see a lot of dead trees up there. Why it's called Bear is way back in the late 1800s, this guy, Jim Ord, who had a homestead over in Loma Pelona, actually built a trail called the Devil's Flower Garden Trail. It doesn't exist anymore, that went over Big Pine and dropped down into this basin. And he went up there to go harvest some cedar shingles, cedar wood, to make shingles for his cabin. And he got snowed in, and he had to kind of wait till the snow melted before he get out there, and he's running out of provisions. And a bear came in, so he shot the bear and ate the bear and was able to last a couple more days. So it's been called Bear Camp ever since then. And I think it's the only camp in the backcountry that's named after a specific animal, because I guess it was named after that bear, right? So between Bear and Upper Bear, the trail can be overgrown. I was out on a trail project for the Condor Trail like 10 years ago, I think, and just happened to catch this caught my eye while I was doing the project, and noticed there was like an egg in a nest. That was kind of cool. And then when I was out there, like, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, almost in the same area, I saw a bird shoot out of a bush. And I was like, why did this bird just shoot out of a bush? So I went over to look where it shot out of and saw like a nest, like in the same general area. It wasn't the exact same bush. And I was like, okay, so that bird shot out of there, was probably in this nest. So I looked around for it and actually did find the bird. And it was a black-headed grosbeak. And it was somewhat patiently waiting for me to get out of there so it could go back to raising its family. Anyways, from Bear to Upper Bear, there is more trees coming back, like the cedars and the coulter pines seem to do really well at resprouting. There's also a lot of great bear sign on the trees. The bears love scratching trees to let people know this is an area they like to hang out with. So this is a shot from the trail looking towards Upper Bear Camp. Kind of past the camp there is where the creek is, the Sisquack, and this place has year-round water. Just a shot in the camp. So I was up here on a solo trip a couple years ago, and for some reason I was being really, really quiet in everything I was doing. I'm not really sure why. I just noticed that I was being really stealthy, and I was breaking off some firewood, like off of one of like these down trees, and one of them just really made this loud snap, and I was like, wow, I think everybody must have heard that. And then I kind of came back to camp and noticed like this bear coming basically on just below the trail. So if you can see the sign in this photo, the trail is right by the sign. So he's just a little bit past that sign, and he's just cruising, through the canyon here, and he sees me and I see him, and I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And I kind of pull out my camera, but I was kind of nervous, so I didn't like zoom in to get these great photos. So they're a little grainy because it was just, regular setting. And he pauses, we exchange looks. And then at this point, the bear decides that he's just going to come over and visit me. And I didn't really like that idea because I was going to camp there that night. So I didn't want him thinking that, hey, it's cool to come visit me. And also didn't want bears thinking that it's a great idea to visit people, because there are poachers out there. And I just don't want them to think that people are like something cool to see. So as he's moving towards me, I'm like, I'm going to have to convince him that this is a bad idea. And I didn't really want to like throw stuff at him that seemed a little over the top. So I just really like kind of puffed up my, body and got kind of big as I could. And I just kind of not shouted, but in a really strong voice said, hey, no, like really convincingly. And it worked. The bear didn't like that. He turned and ran up the trail, and a little later he had a little bit of a yelp that sounded like, I didn't really like that. That was scary. And so I interpret all of that this was like a teenage bear, a juvenile bear, just kind of trying different things out and seeing what works and doesn't work. So I did spend a night there, didn't have any incidents. The bear seemed okay too, because, cleared out of the area. Anyways, that's a bear story, because Upper Bear, I always kind of wanted to see a bear at Upper Bear. At bear camp. Anyways, from Upper Bear, you would continue to Alomar Saddle, go down Medusa Trail, and then come out Santa Barbara Canyon to complete the loop. So that's the last waterfall I wanted to show you. And just a reminder, I have a class coming up in late April, early May that shares some of the trail skills that I've learned over the years, help you know the backcountry like the back of your hand, or at least create the foundation for that. And all of that information is on my blog. And we have some time for questions, I hope.
Yes, got some questions for you. First of all, thank you, James. That was a great presentation. It was a lot of interesting out in our backcountry that I'm sure, I didn't know about. I'm sure a lot of people here hopefully learned some new things today. There was a question about, well, I'm kind of expand on this question, but a comment, it would be nice to get a list of coordinates or directions. Is there a place someone can go online that has our local kind of just list of waterfalls, or just how to access them? Is there a guide that exists out there?
Yeah, so there's not really like a guide that's specifically the waterfalls of our area. I've written about most of the waterfalls that I visited here over the course of doing a hiking column. Guinea Falls isn't something I've written about because I only visited that back in January, but all these other places I've written about. So, if you go to my blog, actually see the picture. If you go to the search feature, you can just type in, the name of the waterfall, and that will describe, like, not how I went there, but how you would go there, like the trailhead and the trail. And then I think a resource that could be helpful in terms of online is Hike Los Padres. And that simply just lists a lot of these trails and camps. And then you can also get like an update on the current conditions and the water conditions in terms of an online resource. I am working on a book on the backcountry that's a guidebook, but that's still down the road. So the blog has some of that information, and I think Hike Los Padres is a good resource. And once you got a trail name or a waterfall name, you can also Google it and see what other resources that you like, and if they're helpful or useful.
And I put the link to the blog again in the chat for everybody if you want to see the text there. songsofthewilderness.com. So there's a one here. Is the root cellar still accessible coming down from East Camino Cielo? Tried and got blocked about halfway there.
Yeah. So before the Thomas fire, you could hike that route. It was overgrown and brushy. I hiked it last year, and I came down from the top, and it's pretty good, like you're saying, about halfway. And I can see where I think the fire crews kind of cut some trail that's a little different than the route that I used to take. But then it just turns into overgrown. And so then you really have to use your cross-country navigation skills to try to tie into that ridge that's going to get you. Like, it helped that I'd hiked this trail before, like, oh, I know I have to get over here, so let me just like cross-country to do that. So if you haven't hiked that trail, I don't recommend it, because you're going to run into like no trail and have to figure it out. And then if you come up from Cold Spring side and get above Tangerine Falls, that route used to be overgrown too, but it's also damaged from the Thomas fire. And a lot of it's just going up the creek now and trying to find like remnants of, like, if you know that route, like, oh, how did I go last time, way back before the fire, and just trying to find that. So it's a little more work. Can still be done, but yeah, you do need your cross-country skills and your route finding skills to do that.
Sweet. Another question here, James. Are all the falls in the 6-ish mile Ojai hike you mentioned off the trail from the Rose Valley campground?
No. So from Rose Valley campground, it's like basically a half mile up to Rose Valley Falls. And then from the campground, there is a connector trail that goes over to Lyon Canyon. And then you'd be on the Lyon Canyon trail up to East and West Fork Line. And it's only off trail just past each of those camps. And that off trail part is like, less than a quarter mile. It's like 5-10 minutes up the creek to go to see these falls. So it's some rock scrambling, but I wouldn't call them like too difficult. But you have to go past each of those camps to tag them.
Can we get another question? Is the asking about the link to the Runner's Flower blog?
They don't have a link, but
Do you know?
it's I'd have to like dig back in here, but I think it's just Wildflowers of Santa Barbara.
Okay.
Let me see if I can go find it for you guys. You can ask another question while I do that.
You got a lot of thank yous and great presentations. Let me scroll down, dozens of them. What was the purpose of the homesteading in the backcountry? What sustained them out there?
Well, so the purpose is that land was available at one time. So why people homesteaded is if you proved up on your homestead claim after 5 years, you could own that land or you could buy it for like a nominal fee. So that was like a way to have a place to live, basically. And so people homesteaded in the backcountry because that land was available and it was promising. The thing that a lot of people don't understand, if they haven't lived here for a long time, is like you can have like these, like I said, it was feast or famine. You can have these great years, like maybe you homestead in the first 2 or 3 years, like there's great rain and great water, and you're like, wow, this is like so great. And then you have a drought for 7 years, and you're like, this sucks, this doesn't work. And so homesteading is tricky out in the backcountry, and there are a number of factors that ended the homesteading era. It happened about the time that the Forest Service formed, and so they were stricter about people actually having to live back there as part of the requirement. They were enforcing that. I did a whole talk on this, and I'm going to go into like a lot of details, but it was short-lived in the backcountry. And when I say that, I'm referring to like the Sisquack. That area was like the most heavily homesteaded out of the areas. But you can still find remnants of it. It's pretty cool. So this is George's blog, Wildflowers in Santa Barbara. I think that's the URL. If you just Google it, you'll get to it. And then George's meanderings. But the Wildflower blog is the more recent project that he's done, and it really does have a lot of cool stuff on it. So if you just go to that, you can drive around in it and see like a lot of neat things.
Sweet. We have another question here, James. Has the Gaviota fire impacted any of these trails? I know you talked about the Thomas fire a little bit.
Oh, you mean, was that called the Gaviota fire? The one that burned Arroyo Hondo and Barone Ranch? The Alisal fire, I think. I don't remember the name of that fire. Just strike that. That doesn't affect any of the trails I've talked about. None of these waterfalls are in that burn area from that last wildfire we had. It did affect, Arroyo Hondo and Barone significantly, but there wasn't any epic waterfalls up there. So, the last wildfire that really affected these was the Thomas fire.
And then another question here. How far is the Dekepis Fall round trip near Camp Whittier?
Yeah, so the trailhead is basically at Camp Whittier. Dekepis Falls is like 2.5 miles round trip. Some rock scrambling in the creek, but it's not that challenging of a hike if you're used to rock scrambling. So that one's like taking my family there. They sort of like hiking, so.
Yeah. And then can you pull up the slide that you had the dates of the hikes that you're doing? That, let's see.
Yeah. So this is a series of 3 hikes. So you'd need to sign up for all 3 through the garden, and each one kind of builds on the next one. So the first one, it really is an orienteering focused class, and then the next one is really working with plants and habitats, and then the third one is kind of tuning into your senses and experiencing the land in a more immersed way, and that's sort of like the super short synopsis of them. But the 3 of them really do build together, and yeah, in reflection, I really do feel like doing those things, and you have to do for a number of years, you could actually get to the point where you really can start to have the skill set to read the backcountry like the back of your hand. Because this is going to help you with your route finding. It's going to help you with like sort of constructing a mental map in your mind of where everything is. It's going to help you with really understanding what's out there and why it's there. And all of that really reinforces the ability to go like, oh, that's there and that should be here. And when I go around this corner, I should see this. And it's just a different way of really exploring the trails and the native plants, because they really do kind of work together. And so that's why the garden is interested in sponsoring the class.
And for people to register, they would need to just do it through the Botanic Garden?
Yeah, it's not on their website yet. So I would just email me, jwapotich@yahoo.com, and just tell me that you're interested. And then once it's on the website, I'll send out a link to all of that and make sure you have the information. But yeah, you'd register through the Botanic Garden.
Sweet. Sweet. Let's see. A couple questions about the talk is being recorded, and we will get it on the library's YouTube page and hopefully to TVSB so they can broadcast it. But if you registered for the event, you'll get an email with the link to the presentation. It's pretty safe to say with the maybe 4 days or 5 days or 4 days probably that if you go to the library's YouTube page, you'll see the video hopefully will be there. Let's see. And so any other questions that I could see here? I know we're pressing up against our time here, James.
A lot of stuff in the chat. Did people put questions in the chat too?
Oh yeah, we've been going through them here. A lot of people, amazing talk. Thank you. A lot of good stuff, James. You want to take a second to check those out. Some really nice words we've got in here. Super informative presentation. Let's see. I found George Williams' meandering blog, but not the Wildflowers blog. Help? ?
Yeah, you're just gonna have to Google it. It is findable.
Yeah. And Kaj, if you want to just email me or us at the library, we could help you out find that specifically too, if it's a little tricky to find. But I think I don't have any other questions there, James. I think that was good.
There we are. sbwildflowers.wordpress. So I'm happy to show this because you see he's got pictures of all the different, not all of them, but like a lot of the wildflowers that you're going to see. And it's organized by plant families, which is a great way to learn about plants because you really start to understand a lot of the key characteristics. So pretty comprehensive. So sbwildflowers.wordpress.com. And yeah, I personally like it because it's a visual, and that for me is a quicker way for me to kind of narrow things down is by just looking at the visual characteristics rather than, like I say, whipping out a guide and having to, count petals and things like that.
Oh yeah. Let's see. There was a question, and this might be the last one. Let me find it. Where'd it go? About the source of the waterfalls outside, the ones that aren't like the source is rain. Is it, Kachuma Lake or anything like that feeds into some of these, or or at least one that's more accessible? You might see a couple drips, or is it all of them just mostly rain based?
Well, so all of the water that we have in our streams is, of course, comes from the rain, right? And then the mountains are kind of like a big sponge, so it does soak up that water and continue to release it. So in a good year, some of these waterfalls will look good, for an extended period of time. Some of the more ephemeral ones, it's like you really need to get out there after the rain has happened. So that's why I kind of put rain in there because, if we live somewhere that had like just great rain and water year round, a lot of these waterfalls would be like year round things to go see. But here it is more driven by how much rain we've gotten. So, I'm kind of underlining that by saying like the rain is a real variable to whether or not you're going to see like a cool waterfall. And just because it's cool in the spring, don't expect to be seeing a cool waterfall in the fall because it's probably dried up by then or looks like a very, faint trickle. And like if you saw something in the spring, don't be like, I'm going to bring my out of town guests and go show up in the fall and tell them this epic waterfall because it's probably going to be a dud and you're going to be like, wow, sorry about that. So that's the correlation.
Hopefully that answered your questions. And I don't have any more coming in, James. I think
okay.
you covered quite a bit. I gave everyone a lot of I think some planning here, waiting for everyone's going to jump at the chance at the next rain. All these places are going to be very popular the day after, morning after. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, so some of these do have water in them right now because we got some halfway decent rain so far in the year. But it's not an epic year for rain or waterfall. Like if I was going to do an article on waterfalls, I wouldn't run out and visit them thinking that I'm going to get some great stuff. But a lot of them are still worth visiting because they are going to be like pretty hikes. So that's sort of the short synopsis.
Oh, that's great.
Anyways, thanks to everyone for coming out. I'm sorry for running over a little bit, but hope it was worth it. And thanks again, Ahmad, for all that you do here for the library.
No, thank you, James. A wonderful presentation. Awesome. We'll catch you on the trails one of these days. I want to go out there, but I want you to be with me. I trust you could handle the bears and the rattlesnakes, and I'll just sit in the shade and watch you do your thing. Yeah, I really appreciate you, James. Just to everyone that's here, the last, few people here, just mark your calendars. April 21st is the next Trail Talks. And that one, again, is the Wildflowers of Figueroa Mountain and the Central Coast with Helen Tarbit, April 21st, again, at 5:30. And yeah, thank you, James. There's a great Trail Talks today.
Thank you, Maud. Thanks, everyone.